people usually feel rising commodity prices, mostly through the food prices, the prices which they pay in the food store, or gas prices. And finally, inflation is actually driven by rising inflationary expectations. If people expect prices to rise, they rush to buy today, and rushing to buy today drives prices today. That's most visible and most very well understood by people when it comes to housing. People feel prices of houses go up, so they are in a hurry to buy as quickly as possible. And the fact that they hurry and buy drives prices higher. Next slide, please. Well, here's a chart where you can just see the money supply, and you can see that money supply has steadily risen since the 1990s. You can see that in the last 10 years has accelerated, but especially since the global financial crisis of 2008 and 2009. And it should be obvious that you have a very, very high spike in the last 2020 year. Money supply, depending on whether we talk about the Federal Reserve, which means United States, or the ECB, global money supply has grown about 30 to 40% in a single year, and that will fuel inflation. Next slide, please. All right, so that's money supply I already discussed. Now about stagnant economic growth. Well, we had the longest preceding business expansion in history has been roughly from 2010 to 2020. According to one of those schools of economic thought, which I explained or at the very introduction, basically says that the longer the boom, the bigger and the deeper the bust, or the longer the bust. So essentially, we've accumulated a lot of problems along the way. We've accumulated a lot of bubbles along the way. And when those bubbles burst, or as they are in the process of bursting, the bust will be a lot bigger. Well, cause number two will be COVID lockdowns. Well, you lock down the economy stops running, or certain businesses stop running. So it is obviously clear that the economies will struggle or will have problems. Number three is post-COVID business closures. Well, many businesses closed during COVID, and many businesses did not reopen. Now there is an estimate that 10 to 15% of those businesses that were closed are not reopening, and there is yet an expectation that maybe 30 or 40% of those businesses that have reopened will not survive for much longer, maybe a year, maybe not. So there's an expectation that maybe 20 to 40% of the heavily affected businesses will eventually go bankrupt. Well, another reason for stagnant economic growth is over-indebtedness. If businesses are deep into debt, or consumers are deep into debt, they aren't going to be spending as much. They'll be servicing their debt. And of course, when there is a rising uncertainty, there will be reduced investments. In other words, when businesses aren't sure what's going to happen, they'll simply invest less. Of course, when consumers aren't sure, they'll be usually spending less. In other words, they'll be more cautious about spending, and there will be some structural unemployment. Structural unemployment basically means that certain industries, for some reasons, will not be expanding. They will be more like shrinking. For example, airplanes, that will be discussed in the next section. So some industries will be suffering and probably not recovering. So there will